Welcome to a world of wonder and quiet magic. Tonight, let your thoughts drift with the snowfall, settling into the soft rhythm of a story woven with courage and frost. Close your eyes and feel the crisp whisper of winter's embrace, a gentle reminder that even in the coldest moments, warmth can be found within. As the northern lights begin their dance, let their glow guide you into a tale that carries the hush of snow and the promise of dreams. Breathe deeply, relax, and let this journey lead you softly into rest. The wind howled through the mountains like a restless phantom, its icy claws sinking deep into the valley below. Snow blanketed everything. Fields, rooftops, even the proud evergreens, now burdened under the weight of an unrelenting winter. This frost was no ordinary chill. It seeped into bones, into the spirit, stealing warmth and hope alike. In a modest village nestled between the peaks, Eleanor pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders as she watched her neighbors shuffle through the snow, their faces pale and drawn. The frostbite of despair clung to them just as the ice clung to their homes. Her mother's hollow cough echoed from their cottage, a sound that cut deeper than the cold. The elders spoke of legends, the ice witch who dwelled in the high mountains. Some said she was a savior who wielded the power to command winter itself. Others claimed she was a harbinger of doom, the source of the eternal frost. But amidst the whispers of fear, Eleanor saw a thread of hope. If the ice witch truly existed, she might hold the key to ending this endless freeze. That night, under a sky heavy with storm clouds, Eleanor packed what little she had. A crust of bread, a small knife, and a scarf her mother had knitted long ago. She left a note she knew her mother wouldn't read until morning. The wind whipped her face as she stepped into the night, but she refused to falter. Each step into the mountains was a step away from despair and toward the unknown. The climb was treacherous. The air thinned, and the snow seemed alive, eager to swallow her. Yet Eleanor pressed on, guided only by the faint whispers of the wind, which seemed to call her name. As she ascended, the world below disappeared beneath a shroud of mist, and the mountains grew sharper, their peaks like jagged teeth gnawing at the sky. She reached a narrow pass, where the cold was so intense her breath crystallized in the air. The wind howled louder, carrying an eerie sound that sent a shiver down her spine. A growl, low and resonant. Her hand tightened on her knife as she rounded a bend and found herself face to face with a creature born of nightmares. It was a wolf, but unlike any she had seen. Its fur shimmered like frost under moonlight, and its eyes glowed a pale blue, as cold and unforgiving as the ice itself. It bared its teeth, a soundless snarl that froze the very air around her. Elena's heart pounded, but she held her ground. Running would mean death. Standing meant a chance. "I seek the Ice Witch," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Let me pass." The wolf tilted its head, studying her with unnerving intelligence. It circled her, its massive paws leaving no tracks in the snow. Eleanor thought of her village, her mother, and the life being strangled by the frost. Summoning every ounce of courage, she dropped her knife into the snow and knelt, baring her neck. "If you are the guardian of the Ice Witch, then judge me," she whispered. "But know that I come not for power or glory. I come for my people." The wolf paused, its glowing eyes boring into hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the wolf stepped back, its snarl fading into a low growl. It turned and padded up the trail, pausing only to glance back as if to say, "Follow." The path ended at a glacier, its surface smooth as glass. Towering spires of ice framed an entrance that seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. The wolf stopped at the threshold, then vanished into the snow, leaving Eleanor alone before the gaping maw of the glacier. As she stepped inside, the air grew warmer, the biting cold replaced by an eerie stillness. The walls of the glacier glowed faintly, as if alive with trapped starlight. She followed the faint hum deeper until she reached a vast chamber where ice glittered like diamonds under a pale, ghostly light. In the center stood a figure draped in a cloak of frost, her hair cascading like a frozen waterfall, her eyes as piercing as the winter sky. "So you've come," the woman said, her voice as sharp and cold as the wind outside. "Another soul seeking the Ice Witch." Eleanor dropped to her knees. "I've come to beg for your help. My village is dying under this winter." The witch tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Winter is not kind, child. It takes as much as it gives." "Then teach me," Eleanor said, lifting her chin despite the tremble in her voice. "Teach me how to master it, to save my people." A flicker of something passed over the witch's face. Amusement, perhaps, or pity. She extended a hand, her fingers tipped with frost. "Very well, but know this. Winter has no masters, only those strong enough to endure its trials. If you would walk this path, there is no turning back." Elena took the hand, the cold searing her skin, and as the chamber began to glow brighter, she realized that her journey into the heart of frost had only just begun. The days in the Ice Witch's domain had no true beginning or end. The sky, visible only through cracks in the glacier's walls, remained a perpetual grey, its light neither bright nor dim. Time itself seemed frozen, much like the air that hung heavy with the promise of power and peril. Eleanor awoke each morning to a silence that pressed against her ears, broken only by the faint crackle of frost creeping along the walls. Her first task was always the same: to carry a basin of melted snow to the Ice Witch's altar in the heart of the glacier. The basin was enchanted, growing heavier with each step. By the time she reached the altar, it felt as though she carried the weight of the mountains themselves. "Why this task?" Eleanor had asked after her first day, her arms trembling and her breath shallow. "To teach you that strength lies not in resistance, but in endurance," Lysara had replied, her voice as distant as the wind outside. The lessons grew harsher as the days stretched into weeks. Lysara was an unyielding teacher, her patience as thin as the ice beneath a spring thaw. Elena learned to conjure ice shards from the moisture in her breath, to weave snow into shields against the cutting winds, and to calm the wild flurries that roared through the glacier's hollow passages. Yet each success brought its own cost. Winter magic drained warmth not only from her body, but also from her spirit. Her fingers grew perpetually numb, her lips tinged blue. Often, she would collapse in exhaustion, the frost curling around her like a living thing, eager to claim her entirely. But each time, Lysara's voice would cut through the haze. "Rise! Winter grants nothing to the weak." The sealed chamber haunted Elena's thoughts. She had glimpsed it only once, when a faint whisper had drawn her toward its frozen doors during a sleepless night. The doors pulsed faintly with blue light, veins of frost weaving intricate patterns across their surface. The air around them vibrated with a presence that was both alluring and foreboding. "What lies beyond that door?" Eleanor had asked the next morning, her curiosity outweighing her caution. Lysara's expression had turned icy, colder than the frost she commanded. "A lesson you are not ready to learn." Eleanor did not ask again, but the chamber lingered in her mind like a shadow that deepened with every passing day. One afternoon, Lysara summoned her to a windswept ridge outside the glacier. The snowstorm roared around them, the gale threatening to knock Eleanor from her feet. Lysara stood motionless, her cloak billowing, but her posture unyielding. "Today you will summon the frost," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly over the storm. "But not as you have before. Today you will command it." Eleanor's chest tightened. Summoning frost had always been an act of survival, a desperate pulling of power from the cold. To command it seemed impossible. Lysara raised a hand, and the storm stilled, its silence as sharp as a blade. She extended her arm toward Eleanor. "Focus. Feel the cold as it feels you. Let it know your will." Closing her eyes, Eleanor reached into the air, searching for the essence of the frost. It was there, a presence vast and ancient, coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. She called to it, her voice trembling with effort. The cold responded, surging toward her in a rush of power that stole the breath from her lungs. Her fingers burned with icy fire as she tried to shape it, to bend it to her will. For a moment, she felt it yielding, forming a swirling orb of frost in her palms. But then it lashed out, a whip of wind and ice that sent her sprawling into the snow. Lysara's voice was sharp as a crack in the ice. "Again!" Eleanor staggered to her feet, her legs trembling. She closed her eyes once more and called to the frost, this time with less force, more focus. She whispered to it, not as a master, but as a partner. Slowly the cold coalesced in her hands, forming a delicate lattice of frost that shimmered like diamonds. When she opened her eyes, Lysara was watching her, a flicker of something, approval perhaps, in her otherwise unreadable gaze. "You are learning," Lysara said, her tone almost soft. "But remember, winter is not a beast to be tamed. It is a force, ancient and wild. To command it, you must first understand it. And to understand it, you must endure." As the days turned to weeks, Eleanor's magic grew stronger, but so did her questions. Who was Lysara before she became the Ice Witch? Why did she seem haunted by the frost she wielded so effortlessly? And why did the sealed chamber draw her with a pull as powerful as the cold itself? The answers, Eleanor knew, lay somewhere in the heart of the glacier, hidden behind frost and silence. But the cost of uncovering them might be greater than she could bear. The storm was alive. Eleanor could feel it in her bones as she trudged through the snow, each gust of wind laced with a whisper, a voice that shifted between rage and sorrow. Beside her, Cale moved with the ease of someone born to the mountains, his eyes scanning the white void for any sign of their destination. He carried a bow slung across his back, though Eleanor doubted arrows would do much against the spirit they sought. "This storm feels unnatural," Cale said, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was steady but tinged with unease. "The winds, they don't just bite, they want to devour." Eleanor nodded, though her focus was inward. The lessons Lysara had drilled into her mind echoed with every step. To calm a storm spirit, one did not fight. To fight the storm was to fight winter itself, and that was a battle already lost. The storm grew fiercer as they climbed, the snow blinding, the wind screaming like a chorus of unseen wraiths. Cale reached out, gripping her arm to keep her steady as they navigated a narrow ledge. The ice beneath their boots cracked ominously, but they pressed on, driven by the faint pulse of magic Eleanor could feel ahead, an anchor in the chaos. After what felt like hours, they reached the heart of the blizzard. It was a hollow, ringed by jagged peaks that formed a natural amphitheatre. In the centre, a swirling column of snow and wind towered into the sky, its roar deafening. At its base, the storm spirit writhed, a shimmering figure of ice and frost, its form constantly shifting between that of a great beast and a towering humanoid. Its eyes, glowing like twin stars, locked onto Eleanor and Cale as they approached. Cale raised his bow instinctively, but Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. "Weapons will only anger it," she said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "This requires magic. And if your magic fails?" She didn't answer. The truth was, she didn't know. Lysara's teachings had brought her this far, but she had never faced a force this powerful. The storm spirit's presence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of raw winter magic that threatened to sweep her away. Taking a deep breath, Elena stepped forward. She raised her hands, summoning the frost within her. The cold answered, coiling around her fingers like a serpent, ready to strike or soothe. She wove the magic into patterns, calling to the spirit not with force, but with understanding. "I know your pain," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "I know the weight of winter. Let me share it." The spirit roared, a sound that shook the ground beneath her feet. Its form expanded, ice and snow spiraling outward in a furious burst. Eleanor staggered but held her ground, pushing her magic forward like a bridge between them. The storm lashed out, testing her resolve. Shards of ice flew toward her, but she stood firm, the frost shield she conjured absorbing the blows. Her magic reached the spirit, brushing against its essence like a tentative hand. For a moment, the roaring wind softened, the storm hesitating. "Eleanor!" Cale shouted, pointing toward the sky. Above them, the storm thickened, a vortex of clouds and snow ready to collapse. Eleanor felt the weight of it pressing down, threatening to crush her under its fury. Summoning all her strength, she let the frost within her flow freely, pouring herself into the storm. "Let it go," she murmured, her voice both plea and command. "You are not bound to this anger, let me help you." The spirit paused, its form flickering. Slowly it began to shrink, the storm around it dissipating like a sigh. Elena felt the weight lift as the wind calmed, the snow falling in gentle flurries. The spirit's glowing eyes softened, and for a moment she thought she saw gratitude in its ever-shifting form. Then it vanished, leaving behind a silence so profound it was almost deafening. Cale approached, his expression a mix of awe and relief. "You did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You actually stopped it." Elena nodded, though her limbs felt like lead, her body trembling from the effort. The frost within her was quieter now, a gentle hum instead of a raging current. She looked at the hollow where the spirit had stood, a faint swirl of snow the only sign of its presence. "It wasn't about stopping it," she said, her voice distant. "It was about understanding it." As they descended the mountain, the storm fully cleared, revealing a sky painted with the faint glow of an aurora. Yet even as Cale spoke of returning to the village and the lives they had saved, Eleanor's thoughts lingered on what she had felt in the heart of the blizzard. The spirit's pain had mirrored her own, a longing, a weight she could not yet name. And as she looked toward the distant peaks where Lysara's glacier waited, she realized that her journey into the cold was far from over. The glacier loomed in silence as Elena and Cale returned, their journey down the mountain marked by a fragile, uneasy quiet. The air around the Ice Witch's domain felt different now, heavier, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Kale remained at the entrance, his eyes lingering on the towering spires of frost. "This place," he murmured. "It doesn't welcome me." Eleanor touched his arm, her fingers still tingling with a faint hum of winter magic. "Stay here. I need to speak with Lysara." Kale hesitated but nodded, his expression clouded with concern. "Be careful." Inside, the glacier's labyrinthine halls seemed colder than before, their crystalline surfaces reflecting fragments of light that danced like restless spirits. Eleanor's boots crunched on the frost-covered ground as she made her way to the heart of the glacier. The air grew warmer as she approached the central chamber, though the warmth was not comforting. It was suffocating, thick with the weight of secrets long kept. Lysara stood at the center of the chamber, her back to Eleanor. The Ice Witch's cloak shimmered like a frozen waterfall, and her presence radiated a power that seemed to pulse in time with the glacier itself. She turned as Eleanor entered, her silver eyes narrowing. "You've returned," Lysara said, her tone devoid of warmth. "And yet you bring with you something different." Eleanor hesitated. The storm spirit. It wasn't just rage, it was pain. I felt it, and I feel it in you too. The witch's expression darkened, a shadow passing over her face. "You presume much, child." "I need to know," Elena said, her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "Why does the frost feel like sorrow? What is it you're hiding?" Lysara's eyes flicked to the far end of the chamber, where the sealed doors stood like silent sentinels. Their frosted surface pulsed faintly, as if alive. "You've seen it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The chamber calls to you." Eleanor stepped forward, her breath misting in the cold air. "What's behind those doors, Lysara? What are you so afraid of?" The Ice Witch's gaze snapped back to Eleanor, her expression a storm of fury and pain. "Afraid?" she hissed. "You think I fear what lies beyond? It is not fear, child, it is regret." Eleanor froze, her mind racing. "Regret?" Lysara turned away, her voice softening, as though the weight of the words threatened to break her. "Once, I had another apprentice. She was strong, ambitious, but reckless. She sought to master the frost, to bend it to her will, to use it for conquest. I warned her of the cost, but she refused to listen." Elena's heart pounded. "What happened to her?" Lysara's shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. "She betrayed me. She tried to take the frost's power for herself, and in doing so, she unleashed chaos. To stop her, I had no choice but to imprison her essence behind those doors. But even now, her spirit stirs, her hunger for power undiminished." The room seemed to grow colder, the frost creeping closer to Eleanor's feet. The sealed chamber pulsed brighter, the whispers she had heard before growing louder. "She's still alive?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. "In a manner of speaking," Lysara replied. "Her body is gone, but her spirit lingers, bound to the frost she tried to command. That is why the glacier never warms, why the winter remains eternal. Her essence feeds the cold. Elena felt the pull of the chamber, the whispers tugging at her resolve. She stepped closer to the doors, the frost curling around her boots like grasping fingers. What if there's a way to end this? To free her? Free her! Lysara's voice was sharp, a blade of ice. Do you not understand? To free her is to unleash chaos upon this world. The frost will consume everything. Is that a risk you're willing to take? Elena hesitated, the weight of the Ice Witch's words sinking in. But the pull of the chamber was too strong. The whispers growing louder, more insistent. They were not words but feelings. Pain, longing, and a strange, terrible hope. Before Lysara could stop her, Elena reached out and touched the doors. The ice burned her fingertips, but she didn't pull away. The whispers became a roar, a tidal wave of emotion that crashed over her. The doors began to crack, the frost splintering like shattered glass. Lysara shouted, her voice a distant echo, but it was too late. The seal broke. A rush of freezing air burst from the chamber, and a figure emerged, a shimmering form of ice and shadow, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The air vibrated with power, the frost around them spiraling into a whirlwind. Elena staggered back, her heart pounding as the figure's gaze locked onto her. It smiled, a cruel, knowing smile, and spoke in a voice that was both beautiful and terrible. Thank you, little apprentice. You've given me exactly what I needed. As the frost surged, Elena realized with chilling clarity that she had made a grave mistake. The glacier trembled as the freed spirit rose, its icy form towering and ever-shifting, both beautiful and grotesque. Frost spread from where it stood, racing along the walls, consuming everything in its path. Elena stumbled back, her breath catching as she felt the raw power radiating from the figure, a force far beyond anything she had encountered. Do you feel it? The spirit said, its voice resonating like the crack of breaking ice. The frost is no longer bound. It will consume this land, reshape it as it was meant to be, a world of endless winter. No! Lysara's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. She stepped forward, her silver eyes blazing with fury. You will not bring destruction again, Elira. I bound you once. I will do so again. Elira, the name struck Elena like a bolt of lightning. This was the former apprentice Lysara had spoken of, now a being of pure frost and vengeance. The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. You cannot stop me, Lysara. Not now. Not after your new apprentice so kindly shattered the chains you forged. Eleanor's stomach churned with guilt, but she couldn't let herself be paralyzed by her mistake. She glanced at Lysara, who was already summoning the frost to her command, the air around her crystallizing into shards of ice. The battle was inevitable. But even as Lysara faced the spirit, Eleanor knew the witch's power alone wouldn't be enough. The first clash of magic was deafening. Lysara hurled a wave of ice toward Elira, who shattered it with a single swipe of her hand. The force sent shards flying, cutting into the walls of the glacier. Elena shielded her face, her mind racing. She had to act, but how could she match a being of such overwhelming power? Elena! Lysara's voice snapped her from her thoughts. The Ice Witch's expression was grim, her control over the frost visibly straining. You must aid me. The frost answers to you now. It always has. Elena hesitated, the weight of the frost within her a cold, pulsing presence. She had always drawn from it, but now it felt alive, a force that wanted more from her. She closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself, and felt its ancient power stir. But with it came the same pain she had felt in the storm spirit, the longing, the weight of endless winter. Elena, hurry! Cale's voice echoed from the entrance. He had entered the chamber, his bow raised uselessly as he watched the battle unfold. His presence was a reminder of what was at stake. Not just her, not just Lysara, but everyone the frost would devour if Elira succeeded. Steeling herself, Eleanor stepped forward. Elira! She shouted, her voice shaking but strong. You don't have to do this! The spirit turned, her glowing eyes narrowing. And what would you know of what I must do, child? You cannot fathom the cold's hunger, its need to grow, to consume. Eleanor met her gaze, the frost within her surging as she spoke. I do know. I felt it, the weight, the pain. But it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to be this way. Elira laughed again, but it faltered, the edges of her form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. And what would you have me do? Surrender? Be bound once more by this witch's chains? No, Eleanor said, her voice soft but resolute. Let it end. Let the frost rest. The chamber grew silent, the frost pausing its relentless spread as Elira stared at Eleanor. For a moment, her eyes seemed almost human, filled with something like sorrow. But then the moment passed, and the storm within her flared again. You are a fool, she hissed, raising a hand to strike. Before the blow could land, Lysara intervened, her magic surging to shield Eleanor. But the strain was too much. Lysara faltered, collapsing to her knees. The frost surged, threatening to engulf them both. Eleanor felt the frost's pull within her, not as an enemy, but as a companion, a presence that needed her as much as she needed it. She reached out, not to fight, but to embrace it. The frost responded, coiling around her, its ancient voice whispering a single word: sacrifice. Understanding dawned, sharp and cold. If the frost could not be mastered, it could only be contained. To end this, she would have to give herself fully to it. Elena stepped between Lysara and Elira, her hands outstretched. Enough, she said, her voice steady. I offer myself. Let the frost take me and end this. Elira's form wavered, her fury giving way to something deeper. You would give yourself to the frost? You would bear its weight? I would, Eleanor said, her heart pounding. Not for power, not for vengeance, but for peace. The chamber trembled as the frost surged toward her, wrapping her in its icy embrace. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting it consume her. Pain and cold flooded her senses, but beneath it was a strange warmth, a peace she hadn't expected. The frost settled, its whispers fading into silence. When Eleanor opened her eyes, the glacier was still. Elira was gone. Her essence dissolved into the frost that now lay dormant. Lysara knelt nearby, her expression a mixture of grief and pride. Cale rushed to Eleanor's side, his eyes wide with relief. You did it, he said, his voice trembling. Elena nodded, though she felt changed, as if a part of her now belonged to the frost. It's over, she said softly. Spring would come again, though Eleanor knew winter would always linger within her. But she had chosen to bear its weight, and in doing so, she had found her strength.